why does the Indian society prefer a girl child over prefer a male child over a girl child?
Most societies do prefer sons over daughters. Ours is not an exception to this. In our subcontinent, not just in India, I think there is a long tradition of who owns the land, how are certain customs perpetuated, how are certain duties and rituals performed. This may be more true of one community than others, but certainly in all of them, it is a patriarchal system. And in a patriarchal system, you normally find that those who carry on the patriarchy are the ones who are preferred, because in terms of status, that's where status lies. And any society where, for whatever reason, a certain image of liability has grown up with a daughter, then even in economic terms, this is not an earner for the family. This is somebody to be paid for, cared for, and then sent away. So a daughter in that sense is not a long-term investment which will yield dividends in the same family where she is born. And if you look at it in even those cut and dried terms of money spent and dividends gained, a daughter doesn't rank in the same way as a son does. Again, with land holdings, the girl may in fact be working the land, but the ownership systems are not such in most of our communities, where the daughter would be the inheritor or the caretaker as recognized by society. So there is a, as I said, not a tradition restricted to India alone, but certainly a tradition where what a boy offers to the family is perceived very differently from what a girl offers to the family.
Okay, now the flip side of this, that obviously this is a perception which is deep rooted and it is wrong. Now, what is being done by the government and by agencies like the UNICEF and other NGOs and stuff to strike at that prejudice, the root of that prejudice? What are the various measures that we have over the past 50 years, let's say, of independence taken to do that?
Well, if we look at the 50 years of independence, I don't think that too much has been done. On paper, we have always had equality. The Constitution also assures that. The Constitution also, in fact, contains provisions for what we call affirmative action, extra measures for the girl, extra measures for women and children in general. But over the 50 years, the kinds of investment in social education that could have been made have not been made. And I wouldn't fault only the state. I think that NGOs also, while they have been part and parcel of a burgeoning movement of women, have not particularly looked at the foundation stage of women, which is girls. They have not particularly looked at how the status of the child affects the status of the woman, particularly if it's a girl child and she gets deprived from the very beginning of normal access to equal opportunities. Again, the socialization of the boy child has not particularly been a concern of the women's movement. So I think that there has been something missed in the NGO sector as well. And unfortunately, the difference between daughters and sons is not something that is just among the so-called poor. It is something that pervades the whole of our society. So that imbalance hasn't really gone away, because even a woman who might be, like myself, serving in a civil service could well be extremely conventional and limited in her perceptions of what her rights are as a person outside of her job.
Now, what are some of the tangible evil manifestations of this prejudice against the girl child as seen in the early years?
Well, in the past and today, a girl is not counted as a permanent fixture in the family in which she is born. She's certainly not counted as an asset. She's classified as a liability from the very beginning. Now, how do you get rid of a liability? Preventive action, such as feticide. Feticide was not a factor in the society of 50 years ago. I don't think the technology existed, except for induced abortions. But induced abortions couldn't be based on knowledge of whether it's a girl or a boy. So it was simply an abortion to get rid of an unwanted child. Today, you know the sex of the unborn child, and so feticide is a technology that is being applied as a preventive action. Then you get another disposable an action of disposal, which is infanticide. Talk about how nice it would be to have a son, including at your marriage. Sometimes, a bride will be told, may you have many sons. It's there ingrained in cultural language. In a study of lullabies in Pakistan, I think about 700 and something lullabies were studied. 3 talked about daughters at all. Of those 3, 2 talked about her being beautiful and being a beautiful bride. 1 talked about the possibility of her having a mind at all. That's only next door, and it's not so different here. So there is something in our culture that is an evil manifestation, if you like. It's not violence in the sense of beating somebody, but it certainly is a confining image that is imposed on the girl child from the very beginning. Every girl child that is born is greeted with something like dismay. It's a failure. You try again. You grow up with that image, and that image is in the mother's mind and the parent's mind as much as it is in the child's mind. If you listen to those lullabies, well, none of them talk about you. They talk about your brother. So these are all denial factors, and this is part of the socialization and upbringing and the sort of environment of the girl child. Then you get more violent forms. Feticide, which is a technology we didn't have in the past. We have it now. It is a disposal action by choice. What pressures govern that choice are the son preference, the desperation of the mother herself, the pressure in the family not to have too many children. Fine, that falls in with the government's programs. But which children are you choosing not to have? This technology is giving you an expression of that choice, and it is an evil manifestation, and it denies life to the child. Infanticide, which was perhaps more pervasive earlier, I don't know, I don't think we have statistics, is certainly still a fact, and in the 20th century it shouldn't be. And then you have the third disposal method, which is early marriage. And early marriage, why? Because it's cheaper than later on. So if you look at it again as an economic argument, the mercenary factors that come in is that feticide is the cheapest action. And it saves you the dowry. Now, if you talk about this and you realize that you're talking about human lives, you realize that there's something rather wrong with the way in which we value a person simply because she's a female. And if you look at amniocentesis and ultrasound scans and so on, which lead you to know the sex of your unborn child, and you realize that those tests are meant to detect a congenital defect, you realize it's a social congenital defect to be a female. Is this evil or is it distorted? What is it? It results in evil actions. It results in crimes. These crimes are sometimes called social crimes, like dowry deaths are called social crimes. These are not social crimes, they're just crimes.